My name is Diane Walker. I was 41 years old when I came home from 6 weeks at my husband's hospital bedside and watched another woman hang wind chimes on the front porch of the house where I grew up. I recognized the hook immediately. It wasn't ours. My mother would never have chosen bright red glass. She loved simple brass chimes because she said they sounded like summer rain. I stood across the street holding my suitcase while the woman smiled at a little boy running through the yard. "Be careful, don't step on the flowers. Those flowers. My father planted them after my mother passed away. He said keeping them alive gave him a reason to get out of bed every morning." The little boy laughed. His mother laughed with him. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt completely lost. I crossed the street anyway. The woman noticed me before I reached the porch. "Can I help you?" I looked past her. The front door was open. The hallway had been painted. The family photographs were gone. The old grandfather clock was gone. Even the small wooden bench where Dad always sat to pull on his boots had disappeared. I finally found my voice. "When did you buy this house?" "About a week ago. We closed on Friday." She smiled politely. "Have you just moved into the neighborhood?" I swallowed. "No, I grew up here." Her smile slowly disappeared. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said something that changed the entire afternoon. "I am so sorry. I thought you already knew." I didn't ask another question. None of this was her fault. She had bought a house. I had lost a home. Those were not the same thing. I walked back to my car before she could see the tears running down my face. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone while trying to call my younger brother. "Eric." No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a message appeared. "Please do not go inside." I was going to explain everything tonight. I stared at those words. Not once did he deny selling the house. Not once did he say he was sorry. For 6 weeks I had been in North Carolina, helping my husband recover after emergency heart surgery. Every evening, Eric called to check on Michael. Every evening, he asked whether the doctors were optimistic. Every evening, he ended the conversation the same way. "Don't worry about anything back home. I've got it covered." I believed him. He was my little brother. Growing up, he followed me everywhere. When he was 8 years old, he cried because I left for my first day of high school without letting him walk me to the bus stop. When Dad taught us to ride bicycles, Eric refused to let go of the back of my shirt because he thought I could somehow stop him from falling. For most of our lives, I wasn't just his sister. I was the person he trusted most. Somewhere along the way, that changed. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're enjoying this story so far, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It truly helps this channel reach more people who love emotional family stories like these. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? I'm curious to read your thoughts. I started the engine but couldn't make myself drive away. Instead, I watched the new family through the windshield. The little boy chased a soccer ball across the front yard. His father carried boxes into the garage. The woman opened every window to let fresh air inside. For a moment, I remembered another family. My father standing on that same porch with a paintbrush in one hand. My mother laughing because he always ended up with white paint on his nose. Eric and I racing through the sprinkler until Mom shouted that dinner was getting cold. 40 years of memories, reduced to one painful realization. Life inside that house had continued. It simply wasn't my life anymore. My phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Eric. It was Richard Collins, my father's attorney. He didn't waste a second. "Diane, where are you?" "Across the street from the house. Leave. Right now. Don't speak to your brother until you've seen what I found." My heart started pounding. What happened? He took a slow breath. "This morning, I reviewed the closing file. There is a document inside claiming you gave your half of the house to Eric before your father died." I closed my eyes. "I never signed anything. I know. That is exactly why I need you in my office. Because if you're telling me the truth, someone built this entire sale on a lie." Richard Collins had been my parents' attorney for almost 20 years. He drafted their wills, helped them refinance the house after Dad lost his first job, even attended my mother's funeral. If there was one person Dad trusted outside our family, it was Richard. That was why I drove straight to his office without stopping anywhere else. He was waiting at the front door before I even parked. The moment I stepped inside, he locked it behind us. That frightened me more than anything he had said on the phone. His office had always felt warm. Family photographs, old books, fresh coffee. Today it felt strangely cold. 2 thick folders lay open across the conference table. He motioned for me to sit. Before we discuss the sale, I need to ask you something. His voice was calm. Careful. Did you ever sign a power of attorney allowing Eric to act on your behalf? No. Did you ever sign any document transferring your share of the house? Never. Not even after your father became ill. Especially not then. He nodded slowly. That is exactly what I expected. He opened the first folder. These were the probate records filed after Dad passed away. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. Dad's will, the court order, the deed, Eric Walker, Diane Walker. Equal owners, 50% each. Richard looked at me. Nothing unusual here. No. He slid the second folder toward me. These are the documents used during closing. I immediately noticed something was wrong. Only one owner's name appeared, Eric Walker. Mine had vanished completely. My stomach turned. How did they do this? Richard removed another sheet of paper. Someone submitted this affidavit to the title company. It stated that you voluntarily transferred your ownership interest to your brother 6 months before your father's death. I took the paper. I didn't even need to read the entire page. The signature wasn't mine. The handwriting wasn't mine. Even my middle initial was wrong. Dad was obsessive about details. He never allowed legal documents to contain mistakes. Whoever created this didn't know our family. This is fake. Richard folded his hands. I believe it is. But belief isn't enough. We have to prove it. I leaned back in my chair. Everything suddenly felt unreal. Yesterday I thought my brother had simply betrayed me. Now someone had apparently created legal documents in my name. I rubbed my forehead. Dad always kept copies of everything. Richard smiled sadly. He certainly did. Your father never threw away a single important paper. I laughed despite myself. Mom used to tease him about that. She called the basement his paper museum. Richard chuckled quietly. I remember. She once asked me if there was a legal limit on how many file cabinets one man could own. For the first time that day, I smiled. Only for a second. Then reality returned. Could Dad have kept another copy of whatever they're claiming I signed? Richard nodded. Possibly. He kept duplicates of almost everything. The question is whether Eric still has them. Hearing my brother's name hurt. I looked out the office window. When we were children, Dad never allowed us to leave the dinner table angry. If Eric and I argued, we stayed there until someone apologized. Sometimes that took 5 minutes. Once it took almost 2 hours. Dad sat quietly reading the newspaper while we glared at each other from opposite sides of the table. Eventually, one of us always laughed. Usually Eric. He could never stay angry for very long. I wondered when that little boy had disappeared. Richard gently interrupted my thoughts. What are you thinking? I'm trying to remember the last time my brother looked me in the eyes without hiding something. The answer came far too quickly. Dad's funeral. After that, every conversation became shorter. He canceled Sunday dinners, stopped dropping by the house, always seemed to be in a hurry. I assumed he was busy. Richard slowly closed the folders. Sometimes we don't notice someone drowning because they're still smiling. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. Eric. This time he left a voicemail. I didn't play it. Richard looked at the screen. Don't listen to it yet. Why? Because whatever he says now will be shaped by fear. Tomorrow we'll have facts. Today he only has panic. He stood and walked toward the coffee machine. Would you like some coffee? Normally I would have said yes. Dad and I always drank coffee in this office after signing paperwork. It had become an unspoken tradition. Instead, I shook my head. I don't think I could swallow anything right now. Richard poured himself a cup anyway. Your father always said bad news should never be discussed on an empty stomach. He paused, then smiled faintly. Unfortunately, he never said what to do when no one feels like eating. I looked around the office. Everything reminded me of my parents. The framed Christmas card they had mailed Richard every year still hung beside his bookshelf. There we were, Mom, Dad, Eric, me, standing in front of the house the first Christmas after Dad retired. None of us knew then that one day a photograph would outlive the family it captured. As I stared at it, Richard quietly said something I wasn't prepared to hear. "Diane, I don't think your father was worried about strangers taking the house. I think he was worried that one day grief, pride, or desperation might make his own children forget why he worked so hard to leave it to both of you." Those words stayed with me all the way back to my motel. That evening, I unlocked the door, expecting an empty room. Instead, someone was sitting in the chair beside the window, waiting for me. Eric. He stood the moment I opened the door. Neither of us spoke. For a few seconds, we simply looked at each other. I had seen my brother tired before. After Dad died, after working 16-hour days, after sleeping in hospital chairs beside Mom. This was different. He looked like a man who had stopped recognizing himself. "I didn't invite him in. You have 5 minutes." He nodded. "That's more than I deserve." He remained standing near the window, as if he knew he had no right to make himself comfortable. I crossed my arms. "Start talking." He took a deep breath. "I know you met with Richard today." "How?" "He called me." I frowned. "Richard called you." He wanted to hear my side before making assumptions. "Did you tell him the truth?" His eyes dropped to the floor. "Not all of it." I wasn't surprised. There it was again. Another half-truth. Another delay. Another promise that tomorrow would somehow be easier than today. I looked toward the door. "Then we're finished." He raised both hands. "Please, just listen. You don't have to forgive me. You don't even have to believe me. Just let me finish." Something in his voice stopped me, not because I trusted him, because I remembered that voice. It was the same one he used the night he called me after Dad died. Lost, scared, completely alone. I sat down without saying a word. He remained standing. "Do you remember the summer Dad made us repaint the fence?" I frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" He gave a sad smile. "Everything." I remembered it immediately. I was 17. Eric was 13. Dad divided the work exactly in half. Half for me, half for Eric. By lunchtime, I had already finished my section. Eric had barely started his. He spent more time complaining than painting. Dad never yelled. He simply picked up another brush and started helping him. That evening, I asked Dad why he hadn't just finished the fence himself. His answer stayed with me for years. If I solve every problem for him today, he'll never learn how to solve one tomorrow. Eric looked at me. I hated Dad for saying that. I thought he was being unfair. I didn't understand until I started my own business. I waited. Where is this going? He finally sat across from me. After Dad died, I wanted to prove I could take care of everything by myself. The house, the bills, the repairs. I wanted you to worry about Michael, not about home. At first it worked. Then work slowed down. Projects were canceled. Clients stopped paying. I borrowed money because I thought one good contract would fix everything. Then another loan. Then another. I interrupted him. Why didn't you tell me? He looked directly at me for the first time. Because I was ashamed. That answer hurt, not because it explained anything, because I believed it. Ashamed. That was my brother. When he failed his driving test the first time, he didn't tell anyone for 3 weeks. When he got fired from his first part-time job in college, he pretended he had quit. Dad eventually figured it out. Not because Eric confessed, because Dad always noticed when something was weighing on him. I looked at Eric again. You should have called me. I know. You should have come to me before you talked to a realtor. I know. You should have trusted me more than strangers. His eyes filled with tears. I know. The room became silent again. Not an angry silence, a painful one. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in my heart since I came home. When you signed those papers, did you think about me even once? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his wallet. From behind his driver's license, he pulled out a photograph. It was faded around the edges. The 4 of us, Mom, Dad, Eric, me. Standing on the front porch the day Dad finished building the porch swing. I carried that picture with me every day. He placed it on the table between us. I thought about you every minute. I just kept convincing myself that I could make everything right before you ever found out. I stared at the photograph. That was the tragedy of it. He hadn't stopped loving his family. He had simply started believing that lying to us was another way of protecting us. And sometimes, the people who love us the most become the ones who hurt us the deepest because they confuse silence with sacrifice. Before I could say another word, someone knocked firmly on the motel door. 3 quick knocks. Eric looked confused. "Were you expecting anyone?" "No." I opened the door. Richard Collins was standing there. He looked from me, to Eric. Then he quietly said the words that changed everything. "I just got off the phone with the title company. They found the original document that affidavit was supposed to replace. And Eric, you need to see it before either of you says another word." Richard didn't sit down. He remained near the door with a folder tucked beneath his arm. Eric immediately stood. "What happened?" Richard looked at both of us before answering. "I stopped by the title company after you left. Their legal department located a document that had been scanned into the wrong file. I thought it would answer one question. Instead, it raised 3 more. He laid the paper on the table. It wasn't the affidavit. It was the original property information sheet completed before the house was ever listed. Richard pointed to one line. Owner names. Both names were there. Eric Walker, Diane Walker. Exactly as they appeared in the probate records. I looked at Richard. Then they knew, yes. The title company knew from the beginning that there were 2 owners. Eric stared at the page. "I never saw this." Richard nodded. "I believe you." The next page told a different story. Several days later, a revised property sheet had been submitted. Only Eric's name remained. No explanation. No supporting order from the probate court, nothing. Someone simply replaced one document with another. I looked at Eric. "Did you ask anyone to change this?" He answered immediately. "No." Richard watched him closely. "I believe that answer too." I frowned. "How can you be so sure?" "Because if Eric had wanted to hide your ownership from the very beginning, he wouldn't have listed you on the original paperwork. Someone removed your name after the process had already started." The room became completely silent. For the first time since this began, I wasn't looking only at my brother. I was looking at the people who had handled the sale. Richard continued. "Tomorrow I have a meeting with the title company's attorney. They're conducting an internal investigation. Someone inside that process ignored documents they already had. Whether it was negligence or something worse, we don't know yet." Eric leaned back in his chair. His face had lost what little color remained. "I told them she owned half, more than once." Richard looked at him. "Tell Diane exactly what happened. No guessing, no excuses. Only facts." Eric nodded. "The first meeting was at the realtor's office. He asked whether anyone else owned the property. I told him my sister did. He said that wasn't unusual. Then he asked whether we were close. I said yes. He asked whether you knew I was thinking about selling. I told him no." I interrupted. "And he didn't tell you to stop right there?" Eric shook his head. "No. He said families often disagreed about inherited property. He told me to let him worry about the paperwork." Richard made another note. "Go on." A week later, he called me. He said his office had found a way to move things forward while the ownership issue was being clarified. I asked what that meant. He told me not to worry about legal language. That was his job. I looked at Eric in disbelief. "You signed papers without understanding them." He closed his eyes. "Yes." I wanted to believe someone smarter than me had already figured everything out. That sentence hurt almost as much as the sale itself. Dad had spent our entire childhood teaching us never to sign anything we hadn't read. Every insurance form, every loan application, every college document. He would hand us the papers and smile. Read first, sign second, ask questions in between. I remembered rolling my eyes at him when I was 18. Now I wished Eric had listened one more time. Richard closed the folder. "There is still one thing I don't understand." Eric looked up. "What's that?" "If you believed you could buy the house back, why did you let the buyers move in so quickly?" Eric's shoulders slumped. "Because I never thought they actually would," I frowned. "What do you mean?" The realtor kept telling me the sale might fall apart. He said buyers backed out all the time. He kept saying we still had time. Time for what? Time for me to find another investor and stop the closing. Richard slowly removed his glasses. "So he kept encouraging you to wait." Eric nodded. "Every week. Until there wasn't any time left." I sat there trying to understand how many chances my brother had been given to tell me the truth. How many times he chose silence instead. Then I remembered something, a conversation from nearly 2 months earlier. It had happened while I was sitting beside Michael's hospital bed. Eric had called late that evening. He sounded distracted. I asked whether everything was all right. He laughed and said he had spent the afternoon meeting with a realtor. I smiled, thinking he was helping one of his friends. I even joked that maybe he had found me a smaller house for retirement one day. He laughed too, then quickly changed the subject. At the time, I never thought to ask which house. Now I realized he hadn't lied. He had simply hidden the truth inside an ordinary conversation. And somehow, that hurt even more than the lies themselves. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same sentence. He hadn't lied. He had simply hidden the truth. Somehow that felt even crueler. It made me question every conversation we'd had during those 6 weeks. Every phone call, every reassuring word, every time he told me not to worry. The next morning, Michael made breakfast. Neither of us was hungry. He placed a cup of coffee in front of me anyway. "Your father always said coffee first, problems second." I smiled for the first time in days. He remembered that. Dad believed nothing good ever came from making important decisions before the first cup of coffee. Michael reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You've been carrying everyone else your whole life. Maybe it's time someone carried you." His words stayed with me all morning. By 10 o'clock, Richard called. The title company's attorney had agreed to meet, not to negotiate, simply to explain what they had found during their internal review. When Michael offered to come with me, I shook my head. This was something I needed to face myself. The conference room looked different from the first visit, less formal, more honest. Karen Mitchell was already waiting. She looked as though she hadn't slept either. "Thank you for coming back, Mrs. Walker. I wish today's meeting were under better circumstances." Richard opened his notebook. "Let's begin." Karen slid several printed emails across the table. "We've reviewed every message exchanged during the transaction. There is something you deserve to see." She pointed to the first email. It came from Daniel Ross the week before closing. The subject line read only 2 words. "Ownership issue." I read silently. "Eric has confirmed there is another heir. Working on a solution. Do not contact her until I resolve it." I looked up immediately, so everyone knew. Karen nodded. "Yes." At least from that point forward. Richard remained calm. What happened next? Karen turned another page. 2 days later, another email arrived. "Ownership issue resolved. Proceed with revised documents." No explanation, no supporting court order. Nothing. Richard looked directly at her. Did anyone ask for proof? She lowered her eyes. "No, that was our mistake." There was no attempt to defend the company, no excuses, only regret. I respected that. It didn't erase what happened, but honesty mattered. Karen looked at me. "Mrs. Walker, may I tell you something that isn't written anywhere in this file?" I nodded. "The day your brother signed the closing papers. He asked whether there was still time to stop everything." I frowned. "What did you tell him?" I told him that once everyone signed, it would be very difficult. He asked me if difficult meant impossible. I said no, nothing is impossible, just expensive. She paused. He looked relieved for a moment. Then he signed anyway. I tried to imagine that moment. Eric sitting alone at a conference table, a pen in his hand. One final chance to stand up and walk away. One final chance to call me. Instead, he signed. Richard quietly gathered the papers. "Thank you, Karen. This helps more than you realize." As we stood to leave, Karen stopped me. "There's one last thing." She opened a drawer and removed a small spiral notebook. "Your brother left this here by accident after closing. We only realized it belonged to him yesterday. I recognized it immediately. Dad had given each of us identical notebooks every Christmas. He called them idea books. He believed writing problems down made them smaller." Karen handed it to me. I opened the first page. Most entries were estimates for construction jobs, phone numbers, material costs, measurements. Then, halfway through the notebook, everything changed. The writing became messy, uneven, almost desperate. One page read, Don't tell Diane until Michael gets better. Another. Find a way to buy the house back before Thanksgiving. Another. She can never know Dad was right about me. I stopped reading. My vision blurred. Those weren't the words of a man celebrating easy money. They were the thoughts of someone watching his own life collapse. Richard gently closed the notebook. That may be the saddest evidence we've seen. I looked at him. Why? Because none of these pages are about greed. They're all about fear. Fear of failing. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of asking for help. As we walked toward the parking lot, I noticed an older woman watering flowers outside the building. She smiled as we passed. Family troubles are heavy things, aren't they? I smiled politely. They are. She nodded toward Richard. My husband and I almost lost everything years ago. You know what finally saved us. I shook my head. She smiled. The day we stopped trying to protect each other from the truth. I thanked her and kept walking. Her words followed me all the way to my car, because for the first time, I realized my brother hadn't destroyed our family in a single afternoon. He had been slowly building that moment every time he chose silence instead of honesty. 3 days later, Richard called. His voice sounded different, calmer. For the first time since this began, I heard something that almost resembled optimism. I think we're finally seeing the whole picture. Can you come in? When I arrived, Eric was already there. He stood as I entered but didn't say a word. That had become our new way of speaking. He waited for me to decide whether a conversation would happen. Richard spread several documents across the table. These aren't new. You've already seen most of them. But today we're looking at them differently. He placed the probate records beside the title documents, then the bank records, then Eric's loan statements. Finally, he placed Dad's will on top. What do you notice? I looked at everything for several minutes. Nothing. Richard smiled patiently, then stopped looking at the documents. Look at the dates. I leaned closer. Dad passed away in February. Eric first met the realtor in April. The business loan had been renewed in May. The house wasn't listed until July. Michael's heart attack happened in August. I suddenly stopped. Richard nodded. Go on. I looked at Eric. You already knew Michael was in the hospital before the house went on the market. He quietly answered. Yes. I kept reading. The first showing was 2 days after Michael's surgery. I closed the file. You were calling me every evening. He nodded. Yes. Asking whether Michael was recovering. Yes. Telling me not to come home. Yes. My voice became quieter. You knew there was no chance I'd leave him alone in the hospital. He closed his eyes. Yes. The room became completely silent. For weeks I had believed my brother lied because he was afraid. Now I understood something even harder to accept. He had planned around my absence. He had counted on it. I stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, people were going about ordinary lives. Someone walked a dog. A young couple laughed over coffee. Traffic moved normally. My entire world had fallen apart. Theirs hadn't changed at all. I heard Eric's chair move behind me. I deserve whatever you're thinking right now. I didn't turn around. No. You don't even know what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? I finally looked at him. I'm wondering how many times you almost picked up the phone. How many times you almost told me the truth. He answered without hesitation. Every day. Then why didn't you? Because every morning I convinced myself I'd tell you tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Then after the next showing. Then after the inspection. Then after closing. Then after you came home. He laughed bitterly. I kept moving the truth further away because I couldn't bear watching your face the moment you found out. I took a slow breath. And yet, that moment came anyway. He nodded. Yes, only worse. Richard quietly interrupted us. I think your father understood something about both of you. He opened Dad's will again. There was a handwritten note clipped to the back. I hadn't noticed it before. Richard slid it toward me. Your father asked me not to show this unless I believed it would help. I read the first sentence. To my children. If you are reading this together, then life has probably become much harder than I hoped it would. Dad always wrote exactly the way he spoke. Simple, gentle, honest. The note continued. There will come a day when one of you disappoints the other. That day is not the end of your family. The end comes only if pride becomes more important than love. Never confuse holding someone accountable with giving up on them. They are not the same thing. I looked at Eric. He wasn't crying, neither was I. We had both cried enough. Instead, we sat in complete silence. The kind of silence that exists only after every excuse has finally disappeared. Richard closed the file. The final hearing is next week. Legally, we're almost finished. Emotionally, that's something only the two of you can decide. As Eric and I walked toward the parking lot, he stopped beside my car. I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything. Probably not. He nodded. Would you come with me somewhere tomorrow? Where? Dad's workshop. I haven't been able to unlock it since the day he died. I looked at him. Why now? Because I think I've spent 2 years avoiding the only place Dad could still teach me something. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Then I quietly said the first hopeful word either of us had spoken since I came home. All right. The following afternoon, I met Eric outside Dad's workshop. It sat behind the old house on a narrow piece of land that had never been included in the sale. Dad built it himself 27 years earlier. He always joked that it was the only place where Mom couldn't tell him he owned too many tools. The red paint had faded. One shutter hung crooked. The flower bed beside the door was overgrown with weeds. For the first time, it looked abandoned. Eric stood with his hands in his pockets. I haven't been inside since the funeral, neither had I. Dad spent more time in this little building than anywhere else after Mom died. Every Saturday morning, he unlocked the door before sunrise. The smell of fresh-cut wood drifted across the yard before breakfast. Sometimes he built furniture, sometimes birdhouses. Sometimes he simply sat by the window, drinking coffee and listening to old country music. He said the workshop helped him think. Eric unlocked the door. It opened with the same familiar creak. Nothing had changed. Dad's workbench stood exactly where he had left it. His old radio rested on the shelf. The measuring tape still hung from the same nail. Even his coffee mug remained beside the vise. For a moment, I forgot everything that had happened. I expected Dad to walk in carrying another piece of lumber. Instead, there was only silence. Eric slowly walked to the workbench. He rested his hand on its worn wooden surface. Do you remember the birdhouse competition? I smiled. Dad told us whoever built the better one got to choose dinner. Eric laughed softly. Mine fell apart before I finished painting it. Dad secretly fixed it after we went to bed. He thought I never found out. I looked around the room. He wanted you to keep trying. Eric nodded. I spent my whole life trying to prove I could do things without anyone fixing them for me. Maybe that's where I went wrong. We spent the next hour cleaning. Neither of us planned to. It simply happened. I swept the floor. Eric sorted rusty nails into old coffee cans. Dust floated through the afternoon sunlight. For the first time in weeks, we weren't talking about lawsuits or signatures. We were simply brother and sister. At the back of one shelf, I found a small wooden box. It was covered in sawdust. Dad's handwriting covered the lid. Projects worth finishing. I smiled. That sounded exactly like him. Inside were unfinished carvings, half-built toys, cabinet handles, picture frames. Nothing expensive, nothing valuable, except one envelope. My name and Eric's were written together. Neither of us spoke. I carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. If you found this together, then you've already taken the hardest step. You walked into the same room. The rest is easier than you think. I laughed through my tears. Only Dad would leave advice inside a box of unfinished projects. The note continued. Everything in this workshop began as rough pieces of wood. Some cracked, some split, some looked useless. A patient hand can repair almost anything willing to be repaired. Families are no different. I handed the note to Eric. He read it twice, then quietly folded it again. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Sometimes Dad still managed to end an argument years after he was gone. Before leaving, Eric picked up Dad's old hammer. The wooden handle was smooth from decades of use. He turned it over in his hands. Do you mind if I keep this? I smiled. Dad would have wanted you to. He was always saying a hammer isn't for hiding in a drawer. It's for building something better. Eric nodded. That's exactly what I want to do. We locked the workshop together. As we walked toward our cars, I realized something had changed. Not everything. Trust would still take time. The hurt was still real. The house was still gone. But for the first time since I returned home, when I looked at my brother, I didn't see the man who sold our childhood. I saw the little boy who was finally ready to stop carrying his mistakes alone. 2 days later, we walked into the courthouse side by side. Neither of us knew exactly how the judge would rule, but this time, whatever happened next, we were finally facing it together. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. No reporters, no crowded gallery, just a judge, 2 attorneys, a court reporter, Richard, Eric, and me. The buyers weren't there. Richard had explained why on the drive over. They purchased the property in good faith. Today's hearing isn't about punishing them. It's about determining who failed to do their job before the sale ever happened. I was grateful for that. The young family had already carried enough guilt over something they never caused. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the hearing began. Richard spoke first. He walked the court through the timeline one step at a time. Dad's will, the probate records, the deed, the affidavit, the listing agreement, the closing documents. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The facts were heavy enough on their own. When it was Eric's turn to testify, my heart started racing. He walked to the witness stand without looking at me. He raised his right hand, promised to tell the truth. Then sat down. Richard asked the first question. Mr. Walker, when you first contacted the realtor, did you tell him your sister owned half of the property? Yes. Did you ever claim to be the sole owner during that first meeting? No. Did you believe your sister knew you were attempting to sell the house? Eric swallowed. No. Then Richard asked the question I had been dreading. Why didn't you tell her? The courtroom became completely silent. Eric looked down at his hands before answering. Because every day I believed tomorrow would be easier. Tomorrow became next week, then next month. Eventually, there was no way to tell the truth without admitting everything I'd already hidden. His voice shook, so I kept hiding. I closed my eyes. That was the tragedy of shame. It convinces people that one more lie will somehow fix all the ones before it. It never does. The attorney representing the title company questioned Eric next. Mr. Walker. Did anyone at our company ever ask whether another owner needed to approve this sale? Yes. How did you answer? I told them my sister owned half the property. Did anyone instruct you to obtain her written consent before closing? No. Did anyone explain that the transaction should stop until ownership was verified? No. The attorney nodded slowly. No further questions. For the first time since all of this began, I noticed several people in the courtroom writing notes at exactly the same moment. The judge looked toward Karen Mitchell, the closing manager. Mrs. Mitchell, please approach. Karen testified for nearly 30 minutes. She admitted her office had received conflicting ownership documents. She admitted the conflict had not been resolved. She admitted the closing should never have moved forward without additional verification. She didn't try to protect herself. She simply told the truth. When she stepped down from the witness stand, the judge thanked her for her honesty. Then he turned toward Daniel Ross, the realtor. He looked far less confident than the first time I met him. Richard asked only one question. Mr. Ross, did you know from your very first meeting that Diane Walker owned half of this property? Daniel hesitated. The judge leaned forward. You are under oath. Answer the question. Finally, he spoke. Yes. Richard asked another. Then why did you continue marketing the property without her knowledge? Daniel adjusted his tie. I believed the ownership issue would be resolved before closing. Richard didn't move. Did you have any legal document proving that? No. Did you have written consent from Diane Walker? No. Did you ever speak with Diane Walker before accepting offers on the property? No. Richard quietly returned to his seat. Nothing more. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the exhibits. The courtroom was completely silent. I looked toward Eric. He was staring at the floor, not avoiding responsibility, simply waiting for whatever came next. Finally, the judge spoke. The evidence clearly establishes that multiple safeguards designed to protect property owners were ignored. The court finds that Mrs. Walker's ownership interest was not properly verified before the transaction proceeded. He continued reading for several minutes. Some of the legal language went over my head. One sentence didn't. The proceeds remaining from the sale shall remain frozen pending final settlement. The title company and its insurer are ordered to enter mediation with the parties within 30 days. The realtor's conduct shall be referred to the state licensing board for disciplinary review. The gavel struck once. The hearing was over. As people slowly began leaving the courtroom, I remained seated. Not because I was disappointed, because I suddenly felt exhausted. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it." I shook my head. "No, we did." He smiled. "Your father would be proud of that answer." Outside the courthouse, the autumn air felt cooler than it had that morning. Eric walked beside me in silence until we reached the parking lot. He stopped a few feet away. "I know today wasn't the ending you wanted." I looked at him. "No, it wasn't. The ending I wanted was for Mom and Dad to still be sitting on their front porch. Neither of us can have that." He nodded. "No, we can't." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, without saying another word, he opened the passenger door of my car, just like he used to whenever Dad asked him to look after his big sister. It was a small gesture, almost meaningless to anyone else. To me, it felt like the first honest thing my brother had done in a very long time. The mediation took place 3 weeks later. By then, the leaves had almost completely fallen from the maple trees lining Main Street. Autumn had always been my father's favorite season. He used to say trees weren't dying. They were simply letting go of what they no longer needed. I thought about those words as Michael and I walked into the conference room. Richard was already there. So was Eric. Across the table sat representatives from the title company, their insurance carrier, and Daniel Ross with his attorney. No one smiled. No one tried making small talk. Richard spoke first. "We're here to resolve this fairly, not to rewrite history. History has already been painful enough." The discussions lasted almost 4 hours. Numbers were written, offers rejected, new proposals drafted. Several times I stopped paying attention, not because I didn't care, because every time someone referred to our childhood home as an asset. I wanted to remind them it had once been the place where my mother sang while making pancakes every Saturday morning, where my father measured our height against the kitchen wall every birthday, where Eric and I built blanket forts during thunderstorms. To them, it was property. To me, it was the last place my parents had ever laughed together. Near the end of the meeting, the insurance attorney slid a document across the table. "Mrs. Walker, we believe this settlement fairly compensates you for your financial loss." I looked at the number. It was substantial, enough to replace what I had legally owned, not enough to replace what I had emotionally lost. Richard quietly leaned toward me. "The decision is yours. No one can make it for you." I looked at Eric. He hadn't spoken for almost an hour. His eyes never left the table. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Before Diane answers, I'd like to say something." Everyone looked at him. He stood slowly. "I spent months blaming my business, the economy, bad luck, pressure. Today I know none of those things sold our parents' house. I did. No one else signed those papers. No one else chose not to call my sister. That decision belongs to me." The room remained silent. Eric continued. "I accepted responsibility in court because it was required. I'm accepting responsibility here because it's the truth." Then he turned toward me. "Diane, I'm not asking you to forgive me today. Maybe you never will. But I want you to know something. Not one day has passed since you came home that I haven't wished I had made a different phone call. One phone call. That's all it would have taken." I felt tears filling my eyes. Not because his words erased anything, because they were the words I had needed to hear months earlier. Richard quietly pushed the settlement agreement toward me again. I signed. Not because the money fixed what happened, because I was finally ready to stop letting that one terrible decision control every day that came after it. When the meeting ended, Daniel Ross approached me. He looked older than he had only a month before. "Mrs. Walker, I know my apology means very little." "You're right. It doesn't change anything." He nodded. "I understand." Then he surprised me. "I resigned this morning." I looked at him. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because I spent 20 years believing closing deals mattered more than doing things the right way. Your family reminded me what those shortcuts actually cost." I didn't answer. Some lessons arrived too late. Outside the building, the air was cold. Michael wrapped his arm around my shoulders. Richard shook my hand, then quietly walked toward his car. Eric remained standing on the sidewalk. There was nothing left to argue about, nothing left to explain. Only life waiting for all of us to decide what came next. He walked over slowly. Dad used to say something every Thanksgiving. I smiled faintly. There are no strangers at this table, only people we haven't welcomed yet. Eric laughed softly. I'd forgotten that. I hadn't. He looked across the street for a long moment. Do you think, someday, we'll be a family again? I answered honestly. We already are. Families don't stop being families when someone makes a terrible mistake. They stop being families when everyone gives up trying, for the first time since this nightmare began. He smiled without sadness, and somehow, that felt like the beginning my parents had been hoping for all along. Winter came earlier than usual that year. The first snow fell on the morning Michael and I drove to Dad's workshop. Eric's truck was already there. He had the lights on inside. The smell of fresh sawdust drifted through the cold air the moment I opened the door. He looked up from the workbench. Morning. He poured coffee into Dad's old enamel mugs without asking whether I wanted one. Some habits returned quietly. We spent the next few hours repairing an old rocking chair Dad had started years before. It wasn't anything valuable, just a simple oak chair with one unfinished armrest. Dad had written a note beneath the seat. Finish what matters. Eric smiled when he found it. He always left himself reminders. I laughed. No. He left reminders for us. By lunchtime, we finally sat down. The workshop was warmer than the house had ever been. Dad had insulated every wall himself. He used to joke that if Mom ever got tired of him, he'd move into the workshop and be perfectly happy. Neither of us laughed very hard at the memory. We both missed him too much. Eric stared into his coffee. Can I ask you something? You just did. He smiled faintly. Do you ever think about selling the workshop? I answered immediately. No, neither do I. Good, because I'd rather lose everything else than lose this place too. That was the first promise we had made each other since Dad died. Neither of us needed to say it twice. A few weeks before Christmas, the family living in our old house invited the entire neighborhood over for hot chocolate and cookies. It had become a small tradition on our street. Michael convinced me to go. I wasn't sure I belonged there anymore. The little girl recognized me the moment we arrived. Miss Diane, come see the tree. She grabbed my hand before I could answer. The Christmas tree stood exactly where ours always had, near the front window. For one painful second, I almost turned around and left. Then I noticed something hanging near the center, a small wooden ornament. It was shaped like the old house. The little girl smiled proudly. Your brother made it for us. I looked toward Eric. He was talking with her father near the fireplace. He noticed me looking, then quietly walked over. I hope that's all right. I looked at the ornament again. It wasn't perfect. One window was slightly crooked. The porch railing leaned a little. It looked exactly like something Dad would have built. It's beautiful, Eric smiled. Dad taught me. The little girl reached up and touched the ornament. This is my favorite one. Her mother walked over carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. We wanted to tell you something. I waited. When we bought this house, everyone kept saying how lucky we were. Now we understand why. Your parents must have filled this place with a lot of love. You can still feel it. I couldn't speak. I simply nodded. Because she was right. Love has a way of staying behind long after people leave. As Michael and I prepared to go home, the little boy ran outside wearing a heavy winter coat. Mr. Walker, he held up a birdhouse. Can we hang it in the maple tree tomorrow? Eric looked at me. What do you think? I smiled. Dad would say a tree is happiest when someone gives it another reason to be useful. The next afternoon we hung the birdhouse together. The little boy held the ladder. Eric used Dad's old hammer. I steadied the base. When we finished, we all stepped back. The birdhouse wasn't there to remind anyone of the past. It was there to welcome the future. As I watched the children run through the snow beneath the maple tree, I finally understood something that had taken me almost a year to learn. The house had never really belonged to me, or to Eric, or even to our parents. For 43 years, it had simply been trusted to our family. Now it had been trusted to another. And our job wasn't to keep holding on to yesterday. It was to honor yesterday by living honestly today. That Christmas, before we sat down for dinner, Eric stood and quietly raised his glass to Mom and Dad for teaching us that a home is built with love and rebuilt with truth. No one said another word. No one needed to. Sometimes the people we miss the most still manage to bring a family together, just not in the way we expected. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe because I share a brand new family story here every single day. And if you're not ready to leave yet, open the next story on your screen. I have a feeling it will stay with you just as long.